If there's nothing else you ever learn from my videos, please remember this. 1. You have to develop an awareness of the way you think. 2. You have to develop an awareness of your cognitive biases. 3. Actively work to improve your ability to think abstractly. Sometimes I actually ask myself, what would Ayanokoji do in this situation? No, seriously. So let's explore that. Obviously, today's recommended anime is Classroom of the Elite, since I've already mentioned the main character, Ayanokoji. But put on your thinking cap, because it's time to think.
Holla at your boy, we doing anime review, yeah. Holla at your boy, we doing anime review, yeah.
I want to start by talking about metacognition. You will never truly be in control of your mind unless you really understand how it works. At its core, metacognition is the ability to be able to understand and regulate your own thinking. You have to recognize how you process information and learn to consciously guide that process instead of letting it run on autopilot. Why does this matter? Because I believe that you should avoid reinforcing habits or mental pathways that pull you away from truth or away from the goals that you're actually trying to achieve. Let me give you an example. Let's say that someone that you don't like gets arrested for a crime, but the reason that you dislike them has nothing to do with criminal behavior. You just don't like the person. But when you hear the news, you say something like, I knew they'd do that, or I had a feeling they were that kind of person. Now, neither of those statements are logical. More importantly, letting that kind of thinking go unchecked will consistently pull you further away from truth. If that mental habit is allowed to flourish, it will distort how you interpret reality across many areas of life. And I think it'll honestly make you dumber. Let's use another example. If I told a room full of WNBA players that the average woman in America is 5'4", I guarantee at least one person in the room would disagree, even though that statement is objectively true. Why? Because, well, when we process information, there's a constant tension between what is and what we personally observe. A WNBA player regularly interacts with women who are significantly taller than average, so their intuitive sense of what is normal becomes greatly skewed. This exact effect applies to everything: wealth, inequality, politics, social media, culture, morals, literally everything. One of the most dangerous cognitive biases we have is the belief that our lived experience is representative of reality. That's why I always tell people to keep this principle in mind. At scale, intuition stops being reliable. Allow me to repeat myself. At scale, intuition stops being reliable. If you want objective truth, you need evidence, not vibes, not feelings, not intuition. Evidence. Now, how does this connect back to Ayanokoji? Well, it's because of what he represents. I like to think of cognition as existing on a spectrum, right? On one end, you have logical thinkers, people who seek verifiable information and try as best as they can to be correct. On the other hand, you have intuitive thinkers, people who rely heavily on instinct, filling in gaps where they don't yet have enough information. I would like to think that most of us fall somewhere in the middle, usually leaning toward one side more than the other. Ayanokoji sits near the logical extreme. He's careful, methodical, and relentlessly analytical. He examines every interaction under a microscope, not because he wants to, but because, well, he doesn't really have a choice. And while I don't think intuition should be abandoned entirely, I do think that as humans move beyond survival problems like hunting and shelter, we should rely on verifiable evidence for most major decisions we make. Heavy dependence on intuition, especially in complex systems, is quite frankly dangerous. If we're not actively checking our beliefs against evidence, then we're admitting, whether we like it or not, that we're operating quite literally on cognitive bias and nothing else. These biases can start small. Some people think that skateboarders are poorly behaved. Some people think that vegans are annoying, but it doesn't stop there. And it honestly gets a lot worse. It's worth stepping back and asking yourself whether your current way of thinking is actually sufficient for the question you're trying to answer or the problem you're trying to solve. This doesn't mean we should all become Ayanokoji. He's pushed a bit too far toward the logical extreme, similar to characters like Robot or Dinosaurs from Invincible, where human desire and individual well-being are honestly barely considered. These things do matter, but different cognitive styles need to be weighted based on how useful they are in a given situation. And I like to think Ayanokoji understands that. When the stakes are high, rationality becomes essential for survival. That applies to school, work, science, law, and honestly most things. I've come to believe that cognitive biases should be confined to mostly personal relationships and casual social situations. Even then, you should avoid jumping to conclusions and assume neutral or positive intent wherever possible. But that's just my perspective. Thanks for putting on your thinking cap with me. At the end of the day, you really want to be in control of your mind, because true control of your mind is freeing like nothing else.
Holla at your boy, we doing anime review. Holla at your boy, we doing anime review. Yeah. Holla at your boy, we doing anime review. Yeah. Holla at your boy, we doing anime review. Yeah. Holla at your boy, we doing anime reviews.